I still remember the day I met Emily like it was yesterday. It was at a tech conference in San Francisco back in 2012. She was standing by the coffee stand, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, laughing at something her friend had said. I didn't believe in love at first sight until that moment. I introduced myself, and the rest, as they say, was history. We were the perfect couple, or so I thought. Emily was a freelance graphic designer with a passion for art and a smile that could light up the darkest room. I was a software engineer climbing the corporate ladder in Silicon Valley. We balanced each other out. She was the creative, free-spirited one, while I was the logical, grounded planner. Together, we built a life that felt like a dream. Our wedding in 2014 was everything we'd ever wanted. We said our vows under a canopy of twinkling lights in Napa Valley, surrounded by friends and family. For years, life was good. We bought a house in the suburbs, adopted a golden retriever named Max, and spent our weekends exploring California's coastline. Emily would sketch while I read, and in the evenings we'd cook dinner together, laughing over glasses of wine. But then, slowly, things began to change. It started with the little things. Emily started working late more often, claiming she had tight deadlines. She'd come home exhausted, barely saying a word before collapsing into bed. At first, I didn't think much of it. Freelancing was stressful, and I knew how hard she worked. But then I noticed other things. Her phone was always face down, and she'd quickly silence it whenever it buzzed. She started dressing differently, wearing clothes I'd never seen before, and spending more time on her appearance. I told myself I was being paranoid. Emily loved me. She wouldn't betray me. But the nagging feeling in the back of my mind refused to go away. One night, I decided to confront her. We were sitting on the couch, watching a movie, when I finally worked up the courage to ask. "Is everything okay, Em?" I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "You've seemed distant lately." She hesitated, her eyes avoiding mine. "I'm just stressed, Daniel. Work has been crazy and I'm trying to keep up. I'm sorry if I've been neglecting you." Her words sounded sincere, but something in her tone felt off. I wanted to believe her, but the doubt had already taken root. A few weeks later, I came home early from work. Emily wasn't expecting me. She thought I'd be at the office until late. As I walked through the door, I heard her voice coming from the living room. She was laughing, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard in months. For a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe things were getting better. But then I heard a man's voice. My stomach dropped. I walked into the living room, and there she was, Emily, sitting on the couch with Mark, her coworker. They were sitting close, too close, and the look on her face when she saw me said everything I needed to know. "Daniel," she stammered, her face pale. "What are you doing home?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could do was stand there, my heart pounding in my chest as the life I'd built crumbled around me. The room felt like it was spinning. Emily's face was a mask of guilt, her eyes wide with panic. Mark, on the other hand, looked like a deer caught in headlights. He stood up quickly, his hands raised as if to say, "This isn't what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like. "Daniel," Emily said again, her voice trembling, "I can explain." I didn't give her the chance. I turned around and walked out, slamming the door behind me. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, heartbreak. I got into my car and drove aimlessly, the streets of San Francisco blurring together as tears streamed down my face. I ended up at a dive bar on the outskirts of the city. The place was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke. I ordered a whiskey and downed it in one gulp, the burn in my throat doing little to numb the pain in my chest. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I checked into a cheap motel, the kind of place where the sheets were scratchy and the walls were paper thin. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene in my mind over and over again. How long had this been going on? How could she do this to me? To us? My phone buzzed incessantly, Emily calling, texting, begging me to come home. I ignored her. I needed time to think, to process what had happened. But as the hours passed, the initial shock gave way to something darker, anger. Not the kind of anger that makes you scream and break things, but a cold, calculated rage that settles in your bones and refuses to let go. By the time I returned home the next day, I had a plan. Emily was waiting for me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked so fragile, so broken, that for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Daniel, please," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." I didn't respond. I just walked past her, into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady, but inside I was a storm. "We need to talk," I said finally, my voice calm but firm. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do anything to fix this. Anything." I almost laughed. "Fix this? How do you fix something that's been shattered beyond repair?" But I didn't say that. Instead, I told her what she wanted to hear. "I need time," I said. "I need space to figure out if I can ever trust you again." She agreed, desperate to keep me from leaving, and that's when I knew I had her. She thought I was considering forgiveness, but in reality, I was already plotting my revenge. The next few weeks were a delicate dance. I stayed with Emily, pretending to work on our marriage while secretly gathering ammunition for my revenge. It wasn't easy. Every time she touched me, every time she smiled at me, I felt a pang of betrayal so sharp it took my breath away. But I kept my cool, playing the role of the forgiving husband with Oscar-worthy precision. Meanwhile, I started digging into Mark's life. I needed to know everything about him, who he was, what he wanted, and how deep his connection with Emily went. I hired a private investigator, a grizzled ex-cop named Frank who had a knack for finding skeletons in people's closets. What Frank uncovered was more than I could have hoped for. Mark wasn't just a cheater, he was a fraud. He'd been embezzling funds from his company for years, funneling money into offshore accounts to fund his lavish lifestyle. It was the kind of secret that could ruin a man's life, and I intended to use it. But I didn't act right away. I wanted to make sure my plan was airtight. I started subtly planting seeds of doubt in Emily's mind, hinting that Mark might not be the man she thought he was. I'd casually mention how he seemed to have a lot of money for someone in his position, or how he always seemed to be working late. At first she defended him, but over time, I could see the cracks forming in her faith. Then, one night, I decided to push her over the edge. We were having dinner, a rare moment of normalcy in our fractured relationship. I waited until we were halfway through the meal before dropping the bomb. "I heard something interesting about Mark today," I said, keeping my tone casual. Emily froze, her fork hovering midair. "What do you mean?" "Apparently he's under investigation at work. Something about missing funds." Her face went pale. "That's not possible. Mark wouldn't do something like that." I shrugged. "I don't know, Em. People can surprise you." She didn't say anything, but I could see the wheels turning in her mind. That night she barely slept, tossing and turning as she tried to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the man I'd described. A few days later, I got the confirmation I'd been waiting for. Frank called me with the final piece of the puzzle, Mark's offshore account numbers and a detailed record of his transactions. It was everything I needed to bring him down, but I didn't stop there. I wanted Emily to feel the full weight of her betrayal, to understand exactly what she'd thrown away. So I started planning the final act of my revenge, a confrontation that would leave both her and Mark broken. The plan was simple, but it required precision. I needed to bring Emily and Mark together in a way that would expose their lies and force them to confront the consequences of their actions. I decided to stage a fake couples therapy session, something Emily had been begging me to attend for weeks. She thought it was a sign that I was willing to work on our marriage. Little did she know, it was the beginning of the end. I sent Mark an anonymous email, posing as Emily. The message was vague but enticing. "We need to talk. Meet me at the park on Saturday at 3 p.m. It's about us." I knew he wouldn't be able to resist. Men like him thrive on drama and secrecy. On the day of the meeting, I arrived at the park early. It was a quiet, secluded spot, perfect for what I had in mind. I found a bench near the meeting point and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The moment I'd been planning for weeks. Emily arrived first. She looked nervous, clutching her purse tightly as she scanned the area. When she saw me, her face went pale. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling, "what are you doing here?" I didn't answer right away. I just sat there watching her, letting the tension build. Then I saw him, Mark, walking toward us with that confident swagger of his. When he spotted me, he froze, his expression shifting from confusion to panic. "Emily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what's going on?" She turned to him, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know. I thought you wanted to meet me." I stood up, my hands in my pockets, and walked toward them. "No, Mark," I said, my voice calm but icy. "I wanted to meet you, both of you." The look on their faces was priceless. Emily looked like she was about to faint, while Mark's confidence crumbled in an instant. He tried to play it cool, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "Look, man," he said, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I don't know what you think is going on, but—" "Save it," I interrupted, pulling out a folder from my bag. "I know everything. The affair, the embezzlement, the offshore accounts, it's all here." I handed him the folder, and he flipped through the documents, his hands shaking. Emily watched in silence, her face a mask of shock and horror. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This," I said, turning to her, "is the man you betrayed me for. A liar, a thief, a fraud." The next few minutes were a blur. Emily broke down, sobbing uncontrollably as the full weight of her betrayal hit her. Mark tried to explain, to justify his actions, but his words fell on deaf ears. I stood there, watching them unravel, and for the first time in months I felt a sense of satisfaction. But I wasn't done yet. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "Mark, you're going to resign from your job and leave town. If I ever see or hear from you again, I'll send these documents to your wife, your boss, and the IRS. And Emily." I turned to her, my heart aching despite everything. "We're done. I'm filing for divorce." She looked at me, her eyes pleading, but I didn't give her a chance to respond. I turned and walked away, leaving them both to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Walking away from Emily and Mark that day felt like shedding a heavy weight I'd been carrying for months. But as much as I wanted to believe it was over, I knew the fallout was just beginning. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles, emotional turmoil, and sleepless nights. The divorce proceedings were messy, as I expected. Emily fought for alimony, claiming she had sacrificed her career for our marriage. But I had evidence of her infidelity, and in the end, she walked away with nothing but her personal belongings. Mark, true to his cowardly nature, resigned from his job and disappeared. I heard through the grapevine that his wife left him and took the kids. He became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered about in corporate circles. I could have exposed him completely, sent the documents to the authorities, but I didn't. I wasn't interested in destroying him, just in making sure he stayed out of my life forever. As for Emily, she tried to reach out to me several times. She sent long, rambling emails apologizing, begging for forgiveness, and even suggesting we could start over. I deleted every one without responding. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. But while I had won the battle, I still felt hollow. Revenge hadn't filled the void Emily's betrayal had left in my life. I threw myself into work, taking on projects that kept me busy 16 hours a day. I avoided my friends, my family, anyone who might ask questions I didn't want to answer. I was a shell of the man I used to be, and I hated it. Then, one day, I got a call from an old college friend, Sarah. We hadn't spoken in years, but she had heard about the divorce and wanted to check on me. At first, I tried to brush her off, but she was persistent. She invited me to lunch, and reluctantly I agreed. Meeting Sarah was a turning point. She didn't pry or offer empty platitudes. Instead, she listened, really listened, as I poured out my heart. For the first time in months, I felt seen, understood, and slowly, over the course of many lunches and late-night phone calls, I began to heal. Sarah encouraged me to take up old hobbies I'd abandoned, like hiking and photography. I started traveling again, visiting places I'd always wanted to see but never had the time for. I even adopted a dog, a scrappy little mutt named Max, who became my constant companion. Life wasn't perfect, but it was getting better. And then, one evening, as I was scrolling through my phone, I came across a news article that stopped me in my tracks. It was about Emily. She had been arrested for shoplifting, a desperate act by someone who had hit rock bottom. The article mentioned she had been struggling with depression and alcohol abuse since the divorce. I felt a pang of sadness, but no satisfaction. This wasn't the life I had wanted for her, even after everything she'd done. Seeing Emily's name in that article was a wake-up call. It made me realize that holding on to anger and resentment was only hurting me. I had spent so much time focused on revenge that I hadn't allowed myself to truly move on. But now, I was ready to let go. I reached out to Emily one last time, not to rekindle anything, but to offer closure. We met at a quiet coffee shop, the kind of place we used to go to on lazy Sunday mornings. She looked different, thinner, older, her eyes haunted by regret. But there was also a hint of the woman I once loved, buried beneath the pain. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unsure of where to start. "I saw the article. I'm sorry things turned out this way." She looked down at her hands, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm sorry too, Daniel, for everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I don't hate you, Emily. What you did hurt me more than I can ever put into words, but I don't want to carry that pain anymore. I'm letting it go for both of us." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I don't deserve your kindness, but thank you." We talked for a while longer, not as lovers or enemies, but as two people who had shared a chapter of their lives and were now closing the book. When we parted ways, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. In the months that followed, I focused on building a new life, one that wasn't defined by the past. I reconnected with old friends, took on new challenges at work, and even started dating again. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the old wounds still ached, but I was moving forward. And then one day, I met someone. Her name was Claire, and she was everything Emily wasn't: kind, honest, and fiercely loyal. We took things slow, building a foundation of trust and respect. With her, I felt like I could breathe again, like the future was something to look forward to instead of dread. As for Emily, I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had checked into rehab and was trying to turn her life around. I wished her well, but I didn't reach out again. Some bridges once burned are better left in ashes. Life with Claire was different. In the best way possible, she was patient, understanding, and had a way of making me feel like I was enough, just as I was. We took things slow, savoring every moment of our budding relationship. She loved hiking as much as I did, and we spent weekends exploring trails in the Sierra Nevada, Max trotting happily beside us. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living, not just surviving. But even as I built this new life, the past had a way of creeping back in. One evening, as Claire and I were cooking dinner together, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Emily. My heart skipped a beat and I hesitated before opening it. The subject line read, "Thank you." I clicked on it, my hands trembling slightly. "Daniel, I know I don't deserve your kindness, but I wanted to thank you for meeting me that day. It gave me the push I needed to finally face my demons. I've been sober for 6 months now, and I'm starting to rebuild my life. I know we can never go back to what we were, but I hope one day you can forgive me. I'll always be sorry for what I did. Emily." I stared at the screen, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Claire noticed my silence and placed a hand on my arm. "Everything okay?" she asked gently. I showed her the email and she read it quietly. When she looked up, her eyes were soft with understanding. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "Nothing. I've made my peace with the past. I don't need to respond." Claire smiled and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you. As the months turned into years, my life with Claire blossomed. We moved in together, adopting another dog to keep Max company. I even started my own tech company, something I'd always dreamed of but never had the courage to pursue. Claire was my biggest supporter, cheering me on every step of the way. And then, one spring morning, as we were hiking our favorite trail, Claire stopped and turned to me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I have something to tell you." My heart raced as she handed me a small box. I opened it to find a positive pregnancy test inside. For a moment I was speechless, tears welling up in my eyes. "We're going to have a baby," she said, her voice filled with joy. I pulled her into a tight embrace, my heart overflowing with gratitude. This was the life I had always wanted, a life built on trust, love, and mutual respect. The birth of our daughter, Lily, was the happiest day of my life. Holding her in my arms for the first time, I felt a love so pure and overwhelming that it brought me to tears. Claire and I were a team, navigating the sleepless nights and diaper changes with laughter and patience. Max and our other dog, Bella, became Lily's loyal protectors, always by her side. As I watched Claire cradle our daughter, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come. The betrayal that once defined me was now just a distant memory, a chapter in my story that had shaped me but no longer controlled me. I had found happiness, not in spite of my past, but because of the lessons it had taught me. One day, while scrolling through social media, I came across a post about Emily. She had started a nonprofit organization to help women struggling with addiction and abuse. The photo showed her standing in front of a group of women, her face radiant with purpose. I felt a pang of pride, knowing she had turned her life around. I didn't reach out, but I silently wished her well. Some stories don't need a sequel, they just need a peaceful ending. Years passed, and our family grew. Lily became a spirited little girl with her mother's smile and my curiosity. Claire and I celebrated our milestones, anniversaries, birthdays, and the simple joys of everyday life. We built a home filled with love, laughter, and the occasional chaos of 2 dogs and a child. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Claire turned to me and said, "Do you ever think about how different your life could have been?" I smiled and took her hand. "Every day. But I wouldn't change a thing. Everything that happened led me to you, to Lily, to this life, and I wouldn't trade it for anything." This wasn't about forgetting or excusing what had happened. It was about freeing myself from the weight of anger and resentment. Emily's betrayal had been a painful chapter, but it had also been a catalyst for growth. It had taught me the importance of trust, the value of self-respect, and the power of second chances. Today, as I sit here writing this, I'm surrounded by the life I've built, a life filled with love, purpose, and joy. The scars of the past are still there, but they no longer define me. They're a reminder of how far I've come and how much I've overcome. Emily's story ended differently. She found redemption in helping others, but her path was never easy. I hope she found peace, just as I did. As for me, I've learned that life is not about the storms we weather, but about the strength we find to rebuild. And in the end, that's what truly matters.